for the group over here. I'm saying to you methodologists, lean over this way. Have a Venn diagram where they overlap. And for the practitioners, lean this way so that you can learn something. And I think the whole thing is built around the concept of creativity and the concept of curiosity. What's curiosity? Curiosity says, I don't understand something, I'd like to learn about it. What could be more important than that as an educator when you got somebody who says, I'm really interested to know how this works. That's the beginning antecedent to learning, in my opinion. You've got to want to think about something as being interesting. So, what do I have to do to be my creative self? The most important thing that I had to deal with, and these are the things I did, that there's hardly any facts in creativity. There isn't the right, the wrong, here's the process. If you run all these things, you're going to come up with creativity. It's something that grows in you. It's like curiosity. The more you do it, the more curious you get. The more, what I hope it leads to, which is the next set of papers we'll work on, is called intuition. You know people that say, I know this, I just can't prove it to you. And they turn out to be right. This paper I talked about, the Journal of Retailing, I knew I was right. I knew it was going to happen. I just couldn't get the journal to accept the article because it hadn't happened yet. But what you have to do is you have to say, I understand what you mean by not having an answer, not knowing the process. How about jumping out and writing about something nobody else has written about? That takes some nerve. What about taking something they've done and modifying it? All of a sudden you've got an enemy as the person who developed that. You've modified my idea, where do you think you're coming from? So I had to deal with this ambiguity thing. There's rhythms. What do I mean by rhythms? I think it's very much like an artist. When you're painting or you're playing the piano, there's a term called circadian cycles that your body goes through on a daily basis, and then obviously for women on a monthly basis. But we go through these different cycles that we have. And what you've got to learn is you've got a creative cycle also that you've got to learn to tune into. You're not always at this highest peak. You know, you'll hear about people getting writer's block, and you'll get painters who can't paint, and people who are writing books can't write. You've got to be ready for that. And the way I deal with it is, I understand the rhythm, and I try to maintain the rhythm. I go so far, and Miriam can tell you, I play the same piece of music when I write that I have for 40 years. I know every note in the entire symphony. Okay, that's how I'm trying to control my rhythm. I'm trying to control my pace. And when I'm writing, it gets into a groove. I'm kind of, okay, I'm getting this, it works. If I don't play that music, most of the time I'm much slower. It's much harder for me to be successful in writing something. Understand that your intuition, your insight, your creativity ebbs and tides. The way to get around that is be working on another project. So when this one goes down, the other one comes up. And this one goes up, that one goes down. And you've got to learn to manage. I try to work on 15 to 20 projects at a time, just for this reason. I don't want to be writing along and all of a sudden I go, oh crap, I don't know the answer to that. I'm going to sit here for 2 weeks trying to figure it out. The answer is no. I put it back over here, pick up another paper, and start writing on it. The masters in the Renaissance, how did they paint pictures? They had an entire studio filled with their pictures, half empty, and then they'd work on horses, and then they'd go work on people, and then they'd go work on buildings. They never stayed with one painting the whole time. The reason for that, I think, was this rhythm that you get into. And we have them, you just have to be aware of them. People have to be willing to change. You have to be willing to take the risk of change. If you really look at what change means to us, it's risky. I'm going to do something different. I'm going to say something different from the man in my field. You've got to be willing to really jump on that change thing and just keep pushing it forward. I started on inpatriation in 1993. It kind of got acceptance about 2002. It was 10 years of just doing this. There's 46 papers that have ever been written on the topic in the world. I've written 44 of them. That was persistence. It was being willing to, I believe in my change. I believe that it's the right thing to do. I'm going to keep pushing this thing to happen. Another thing I had to look for was, I think important things are humorous. I think they're funny. I think when you look for things that are kind of juxtaposition, if you look at them, they're going like this, and you're saying, well, that's interesting. What if I did this and made them work together? So humor to me is, I play with humor all the time. Sometimes Miriam and Natasha don't think I'm quite as funny as I think I am, but I enjoy riddles, puzzles. I like things that are unsolved. Nothing's more fun to me than somebody walk in and say, methodologically maybe, but here's an idea, I just can't get the beginning and the end going. Well, I'll spend all the time in the world on that. I think that's fun. There are people that buy into doing crossword puzzles. Okay? What's the problem with the crossword? And this is the kind of person here. But what's wrong with the crossword puzzle? The answer is already known. They're saying, catch me if you can, figure it out if you can. Well, who the hell wants to do that? I don't want to do that. I want to start out with my own crossword puzzle and fill in the blanks so that when I give it to you, I can say, see if you can figure this out. One of the things you have to do, and you have to be willing to do this, in my opinion, is you're going to have a cadre of workers that you work with on your papers, but you got to be willing to do it on your own. Okay? The argument for my graduate assistant, she can tell you, she's right here. If you don't want to work on Saturday and Sunday, don't be his assistant. Because I'll be there every Saturday, every Sunday. I go to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, go home about 4 o'clock, and sometimes I'll sit up in the evenings and read what I'm supposed to be studying. You've got to spend the time. There's a guy at one of the universities I was at, and he's a funny guy anyway, but I heard him tell somebody, I think Harvey has gnomes that work in his office. You know, and the reason for it is every time Craig would come by, I'd be staring at the ceiling. Why am I staring at the ceiling? I'm thinking. Now, when Craig wasn't around, I'd be typing and drawing and doing all these other things I had to do, but you've got to step back and you've got to say, I just don't understand this. How does this work? And spend time trying to come with the creative front end of being curious enough to say, what's this all about? Some other creative assessment, you've got to believe in yourself. Okay, you've got to say, I believe my idea is good. I believe that it's going to be important. And what you've got to do is you've got to be able to be comfortable with this balancing between what's existing and what's not existing. It's real hard to take on one of the biggest people in your field who's published in all the best journals and you say, you're wrong. Or, we need to modify what you're doing because the environment has changed. That's real hard to do. Shelby Hunt's a good example. This guy is he is an ogre. He is somebody that will rip your head off with a drop of a penny. And to say, Shelby, you're wrong, you better really have your thing worked out. But what you've got to say is, I'm comfortable with doing it. I think that I have the intellectual capability to do that. You can't be timid, in my opinion. If you're timid, what will you do? You'll move to the middle and you'll take your piece of sand and you go, whoops, look what I did. Gee, I have a job. I have a 5-year continuing job. Isn't that fun? You just put your little piece of sand on, walk back to your office and read the newspaper. Okay, another thing that you have to do is I like paradoxes. This doesn't make sense. Conundrums. I can't explain why this works. Why can't I explain why we can't hire people to go overseas anymore? In the United States, we've got a tremendous problem. Here's our problem, and this is what Miriam and I work on. The problem is, the future of business is global. Okay? Global meaning we're going to go to the emerging economies, we're going to go to the transition economies, we're going to go to the existing ones, but I've got to come to Miriam as a potential person sent overseas and say to her, I want you to go to Bangladesh and live there for 20 years. What do you think the chances of Miriam doing that are? Pretty minimal. I've got a position open and it's in Indonesia. I lived in Indonesia. I had one guy that kept snakes out of his house. That was his only job, was keeping snakes out of the house. I never told my wife that, but that was his job. You know, he'd just give me these little singles like this, and that meant he got 2 or 3 that day. He never gave me 0. Never. But I like to find things where people say, this doesn't make it, why would we have trouble sending people on an overseas assignment? But when I say, oh, by the way, she's got a husband, which she doesn't, thank God, and he has to have a job, and she's got 2 kids that have to go to school, and it's going to cost us $700,000 to send her over there, all of a sudden, I don't have any people who want to go overseas, particularly to Indonesia for 20 years. They have no clue what that's all about. So that's a paradox to me. That's exactly where repatriation came from. We couldn't find enough people to go over, so I said, why don't we bring some of their people over here to teach us that Indonesia is really a pretty nice place if you know what you're doing. Globalize us, get us to globally think about where to go in the world and why those are good. Just because I don't know anything about it doesn't mean it's bad.